We'll save 10 minutes at the end of the session for Q&A, and Dhaval wanted to introduce himself, so there you go.
Oh, thank you. I am me.
Hi, me.
So this is the first time I'm presenting this talk, so it's going to be rough. Yeah, I realize I have too many slides, so I'm hoping to be on time because I'm starting from scratch, so from the very basics. And then we'll move into the topic of generative versus prescriptive and comparing scaling agile frameworks, and a lot of things will occur. So let's get going. What is it? Chris, I've asked my friend to hold something. What is that Chris is holding? Or what am I holding? How is this a leaf and that a leaf too? That's a drawing of a leaf. That's a very important distinction because this is the actual leaf. That is a sketch of a leaf. Okay, let's try it again. What is this? Correct. Now you see the details behind it. There are layers and layers of how I take a picture of a leaf, how I take a sketch of a leaf, how I present the leaf over here. No matter what I do, I will never produce this leaf. Because the way I manufacture or produce this leaf is completely different than how I project a picture of a leaf. Are you guys with me so far? So that's the first statement, generative versus prescriptive. Now, when we talk about frameworks, we are essentially talking about models. There are two kinds of models. The first model is a descriptive model. The use of a descriptive model is to describe something that exists in the real world, but we summarize it in some shape or form to only accentuate a certain aspect of it. In other words, a real leaf has chlorophyll in it. It can do photosynthesis. If I look under the microscope, I'm going to look at the cellular structure. That is not something that I will ever find in a descriptive model. In other words, no matter how well I describe something that exists in the real world using a model, that model will never be complete. To put it differently, if I want to create a leaf, I have to create the whole leaf. In other words, when the model and the artifact are the same, I've essentially grown this leaf, not drawn it, not taken a picture of it. That's a descriptive model. What you're going to see in the rest of the talk is some description of models of how we approach the building of products. But that is just a model. It will never cover the entire detail in finer granularity, but just enough to make a point. So if you look at that descriptive model, you'll find there are a lot of gaps in it, because if I have to recreate the exact thing, I'll have to do it completely in front of you, which is not feasible. So that's the first limitation of a descriptive model. Another kind of a model is called a normative model. This is a frame that we adopt to normalize our behavior in order to achieve a goal that is promised when you follow that normative model. This is what we mean when we say framework. The frame we choose and how we fill the frame with the work that we do should help us achieve the goal that we are trying to achieve. So far with me? Okay. Does anyone follow a framework for healthy living? I've put some ideas over here. My favorite is couch crunch. You sit on the couch, you put a bag of chips right at your toes, and then you crunch. Yeah, while you eat, and that way you get a six-pack. You see, that framework is not trustworthy because there are certain normative models. Once we adopt a frame, we start to act according to the details inside the frame, it should help us achieve the goal that we are adopting the framework for. So if I adopt a framework that does not help me to achieve my goals, then most likely that framework is not trustworthy. Here's a way to test. If the framework is effective, then you are going to transcend that framework and look into a class of problems that are different than when you adopted the framework. You'll see this in organizations that have been practicing Scrum or Kanban effectively, is after multiple years, the vocabulary of Scrum just becomes the norm, and they start to extend it beyond the basics of the Scrum framework. An example would be Google Sprint. Has anyone heard that? Design Sprint, Google Design Sprint? Excuse me. Did Scrum well, learned from it, extended it to their own problem statement, which is how do we design a problem fairly quickly. The problem with charlatan frameworks, which is a framework that does not help, like the couch crunch, is the first response you're going to get is you don't get it. Then the second response would be you didn't really do it because there is something that you had to try hard enough, and the final response will be it depends. The moot problem that you started with will still remain the same, but you would have gone through at least 2 or 3 budgeting cycles by the time you hit the it depends phase or the stage. Yeah? So let's look at the frame and how we fill the frame. The project frame is made out of cost, schedule, the projected benefits or a return on investment or business case, and some schedule around it. The way we fill the project frame is through inside-out project plan. In other words, what you're going to find is once you have an expectation set of what it should cost, what the scope is, what the schedule is, and the benefits that are required, you're going to fill it with a phased plan that looks like a Gantt chart. Basically a sequence of horizontal bars that move across time would ultimately result in the project completed. Here, the plan has the object of control as the worker. In other words, the purpose of the plan is to control the worker and their actions. And you will notice this in every organization. Wherever there's a Gantt chart, there is either a team or a worker expected to perform a set of tasks at some certain point in time. The history of the Gantt chart comes from part manufacturing. Now I'm going all the way to early 1900s. In a shop floor, you had a planner. The planner was called the production manager. They would create a production plan for the shop. There would be a foreman who is the coordinator, and there will be a worker or an operator sitting on a machine operating to generate widgets. The shop floor will have a plan of generating, let's say, 10,000 widgets per month. The shop floor manager will say, foreman, you have a target of 2,500 parts per week. The foreman will go to the worker, and they'll say, you have 500 parts per day. In this way, they can track whether the progress according to the plan is going to help me meet my target of 1,000 or 10,000 parts per month. What also occurs here is notice how the plan goes down and assignment occurs one layer below, and the bottom layers, they report up status updates all the way to the shop manager or the production manager. The IT shop was run similarly. In the IT shop, the production manager is called the project manager or the analyst, who creates a project plan, who then coordinates with a functional or an application manager that will then do allocation of a resource, being a human being, to work on certain tasks for a certain period of time, and then they will receive task assignment that they will have to provide to the levels up. Now in fake Agile, what this looks like is you now have a team level product owner who has a team level product backlog. The leads inside the team, they do upfront story allocation for multiple sprints or for the single sprint, identify the task, assign those tasks to the individual resource so we can fill in the capacity that you have. Notice how at the shop floor, you ask for vacation schedules so you know when someone's going to be available to operate the machine. We do the same thing in an IT shop. When we move to fake agile, we still do the same. Do a capacity calculation for the duration of the sprint, look at the free capacity, fill it up, then the worker has to report on the tasks that were assigned to them using Jira and other techniques. But the basic essence of it is to report on the tasks that have been assigned to the worker. If I extend this as a graph, what you're going to see now is that in order to move from the shop floor to now building an engine, I now have a sequence of shop manager, foreman, worker, aligned and reporting to another person called the line manager. The line manager also has a Gantt chart. They also have a production plan. They also provide assignments that get distributed at the shop floor, which then get reported up as status of whether we are going to produce 500 engines this month. The same thinking goes again, where we have the IT unit as opposed to the single IT shop. Now the IT organization has become bigger, so I now need a program manager. The program manager needs a projects plan. The coordinators are now project managers, and the workers are my functional or application groups. Fake Agile, I now need team leads or so-called coaches, component level application managers or product managers, and a fake Agile team reporting on the story completion rate for every single sprint. I'm going to lose my breath, but I'll continue. On the plant assembly line, when I now have to produce a car, I have a plant manager who has an assembly line, who works with the line manager, who works with the shop manager in order to produce the final car. Notice what is constant as you scale up from a single shop all the way to the whole assembly line. The Gantt chart. All right? So if a system produces an artifact over and over and over again, then you could say that is a characteristic representation of that existence of that system. Are you guys with me so far? Okay. So what do we see? What we see in a bureaucratic agile is the same mimic copying of business or IT director now becomes a business owner. Business or IT requirements become a solution train where we pre-plan. That pre-plan leads to architect, solution train engineers, et cetera, et cetera. Man, the jargon is just killing me. Solution train backlog, component or app level stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So what you now find is essentially what we have done is we have scaled 1900s management practices into IT. But the labels have changed. Plant manager, production line manager, production shop manager, portfolio manager, program manager, project manager, product manager, people manager. Notice how the PM repeats itself. Yeah, yet another PM. Because it is so familiar, it feels like that's what we need to get. Another PM full form. Are you pondering what I'm pondering? This is one of my favorite cartoon series, Pinky and the Brain. Pinky makes plans of world domination. The next day, the plans fail. Hybrid Agile, what tends to occur in organizations that are trapped in the industrial economics of unit-based economics model, they always want some kind of a hybrid approach because they're not ready to let go of the shop floor management practices from way back when, because they want their Gantt charts, which is a plan-driven approach. I'll leave it here as a reference. There was a QR code. You can kind of get the whole slide deck. And the QR code will show up again, but what Larman's law of org behavior describes is essentially confirmation bias at scale. And what Larman is describing here is that initially the change will be derided, then it will be co-opted and modified to represent and build the same system that existed before the change was introduced. The only difference would be that the labels will get changed. And my contention is that the acronyms have not changed really. They are still PMs. Yeah? How many Home Depot trips does it take to finish a weekend project? 5? Yeah? It at least takes one extra, more than one that you have planned for. So notice this, yeah? I have a weekend. There is a simple drywall hole in my house. I have the materials that I need, and yet I cannot plan how my weekend will go. I'll miss my football game because I have to make a trip to Home Depot, which fortunately for me now, after I introduced the problem, they built a Home Depot 20 minutes away from me. Earlier it was like 45 minutes, so I'm lucky that way. But it still takes more time to go to Home Depot, find the damn part, come back. The fix is actually 2 minutes or so, if I had the right part. So if I, as a human being, I don't know about you all, if I cannot plan my 2-day simple home improvement fix, what gives me the confidence that I can plan for 500 people or 10 people for a 6-month project with any confidence? This is what is described as planning fallacy by the folks who wrote the book Think Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman and Amar Tversky. The central point is this. When we plan, we are optimistic. We think in concrete, optimistic steps that lead from one incremental progress state to another incremental progress state, because the work is happening in some point in future, maybe tomorrow, maybe 2 months from now. But when you actually sit down to do the work, our thinking flips into what are the impediments. Oh, I don't have the right part. I don't have the right materials. I don't know how to do it. Let's go to YouTube. So I run into impediments when I'm doing the work, but when I'm planning the work, I have a forecast of how beautiful the universe will be as I accomplish each step in my plan. The trap that most organizations are caught up in could be described as a design, bid, build trap. This trap can play across time and across space. What tends to occur in the design, bid, build trap is a group of people who do the design, who plan for it, document it, are not the people who are going to implement it. So they create a plan of how things ought to be. Let's call it a playbook if you're doing an agile transformation, or a blueprint, or a requirement spec, or a design spec. And that spec is then handed over to a group of people who are going to implement and build it. At no point will the designers and the builders work together to build the thing for real. A handoff process will occur. What this looks like in projects organization is first, a project is estimated based on the requirement from the functional skills. You'll say, we need this skill for this many hours, and then it will then be distributed to people where you'll say, Adam, you're going to work 20 hours on project A, 10 on project B, and 10 on project C. That's what your work looks like. This type of a system is no different than making a plan and a task assignment, and then going back to Adam every week to find out where he's at with respect to the tasks that were assigned to this individual. Now, if Adam has a wisdom tooth problem, my entire company's plans are off track because I did all my balancing and planning ahead of knowing the fact that he might have a wisdom tooth issue. So let's kind of look at one core pattern. Less integrated problem solving. There is a handoff, and in this handoff, what needs to be done and how we are going to build it is connected through a handoff that occurs between two separate groups of people. Do we understand how the project frame is and how we fill that project frame? Going back to the original conversation, in normative frameworks, the frame we accept then becomes our norm, and we fill that frame with, we fill the world into that frame. So if I now change my frame from a project to a product, which will require you to step into the shoes of a customer, not in the shoes of the company that is building the product. When you look at it from the outside in customer view, you are looking at a product and you're wondering, how much does it cost? What does it help me do? What value do I get? And will I continue to use this product after I've used it once? What product people will call it churn, what I as a customer will call, I really like it. I use it every day. Here, what I care for is the quality of the product. Quality being, does it give me satisfaction when I use this product for the price that I paid to acquire that particular product? When we adopt the product frame, the project frame needs to get smaller and smaller. And I'll thank PMI for giving a definition for a project as a temporary endeavor, not a permanent endeavor. So my ask when you adopt a product frame is to make the project as temporary as you can. 1-week projects. That's about the right size of projects to accept. Because when you take those projects and make them really, really tiny projects, now you're pursuing opportunities, not pursuing huge projects. We'll look at why that is important. The first thing is when you adopt the product frame, your object under control now becomes the integrity of the product, because the customer cares about the quality of the product. Therefore, our emphasis of controlling something is no longer the worker, but the integrity of the product that we are building, which requires that you expand the product definition and reduce the size of the project that you take into your orgs. Let's see what this looks like. Coming back to assembly line, and we're looking at a car being manufactured in a lean assembly line. Notice how the Gantt chart is replaced with the and-on code. The shift is from creating a plan and then converging on that plan. We don't do that. Instead, we converge on product integrity. And the way we converge on product integrity is by putting a stop-the-line cord across the entire assembly plant. Whenever someone pulls the cord, the whole assembly plant shop stops. You look at what is causing the quality issue, which means rather than sending a report to the manager goes to the problem where it is occurring. See, the direction of flow is completely opposite. Rather than sending reports up the chain, managers go down to where the work is actually happening, which is on the shop floor or on the assembly line. Additionally, you have just-in-time mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera. This is where the descriptive model is not completely descriptive. I'm focusing on only one aspect, which is the direction of management involvement. Here, the direction is towards the problem, not reporting the problem up. Manager goes to the problem does not get reported to the manager. In lean digital product management, what this means is I now have a build pipeline or mainline development. When the build breaks, I have people converging to why the build broke. And now we solve for that issue at the time where the build is breaking, as opposed to sending a report to people that build has broken. A simple heuristic. Look at your build. Yeah, well, if your build was previously working 3 months ago, you are at minimum 3 months away from releasing the product in any shape or form. Don't trust any other metric, because you have accumulated at minimum 3 months worth of quality issues that will be non-trivial to resolve. Therefore, you must always keep your build running. When it fails, the first response has to be to go to the reason why the build failed, not to send a report about why the build failed, but to actually fix the reason why the build has failed. Okay, so a short bit of trivia. In today's day and age, manufacturing has moved to other places. The only manufacturing that is still here in the US is now lean manufacturing. If you have friends in the manufacturing plants, you should ask them how do they operate, and they're going to describe a lot of lean techniques being applied in their manufacturing shops. This is something that has not yet arrived at IT shops in most places, which is what Agile is trying to do, is to bring back this lean mindset of sending bad news up and bringing talent to the problem, as opposed to sending reports up and bringing more expectations down on the workers to finish on the project frame. Kanban takes the same approach by orienting a group of people who are trying to build the whole product using a flow-based approach. In Kanban, the and-on card is your work in process limit. What I mean by this is whenever the work in process limit is reached or exceeded, that signals a need for help or a need for collaboration, and that is how we resolve flow issues, which is similar to the just-in-time manufacturing that occurs. In Scrum, which is a goal orientation, in Scrum we have an implicit pull. We don't call it explicitly pull, but I call it an implicit pull because the team, which is the Scrum Master, product owner, and the developers, they say, here's the goal that we can sign up for and we feel we can be successful with in the next 2 weeks. So they are selecting the goal based on their sprint planning efforts, their awareness of the context, as opposed to the goal being pushed to the team. And what bubbles up in pursuit of this goal every 2 weeks are my impediments that either get resolved through daily operational check-ins or through retrospectives or other mechanisms. The difference in both flow-based and in goal-based approaches like Kanban and Scrum, you're looking at a more integrated approach. What needs to be built and how we are going to build it is happening at the same time. Why this is important? The cost of change with less integrated approaches is very high. Because when you start with a plan of what you want to build, let's call that the architectural plan. If something changes in the environment, which usually does, now coming back and making changes to all of that design is very, very expensive. So using a more integrated approach, I can now reduce the cost of architectural change, I can reduce the cost of development, I can reduce the cost of testing simply by doing one trick, which is reducing the size of the requirement, which is essentially a smaller and smaller and tinier project with a stable group of people working on these requirements all the time, as opposed to fractional allocation of individuals to large projects. So here's the first advice on scaling. Nail it before you scale it. If you scale it before understanding what Agile is, the most likely outcome is going to be a Gantt chart system only with Agile labels on it. So the first thing to do is to figure out how can we dedicate a cross-functional team of experts to a product or a service stream, build a single intake backlog, so not multiple backlogs, but a single backlog, and how can we bring attention to the work, not to the worker. After you've done that, then you can talk about how to scale. We'll now pivot to a different framing. Physical products versus digital products. By digital, I mean software. In the physical product, the economics of physical products, which are no different than digital products, by the way. This is a sheet metal screw. It has a module, it has a feature, and it has an interface. The same thing applies to your SaaS API. There is something it does, there is an interface to use it, and then there are different capabilities that API can help you with. The difference in economics of this is for the physical product, you have some fixed cost of setting up a factory, and then there is a per unit cost of manufacturing every single unit. In digital, you pay everything up front. And once it works for your customer, then generating the next instance of the same service is practically free. You see, because in the digital world, in the software world, the manufacturing is being done by your compiler. It's being done by the server, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the first part that is more expensive in the software world. So applying the economic theory of mass economics, unit economics is not going to work in the digital space. The problem domain is completely different. In other words, what I'm trying to say is you will never hire an engineer because they have created 1,000 login pages at the previous company, and you want them to create 2,000 login pages in your company. Every time they're going to work on a different kind of a problem, a different requirement, and once they solve that problem can be solved over and over again at a very limited cost, just the cost of compute. The difference is in the nature of work. In industrial work, you have to learn by repetition, which means you require experience to be able to work on the machine, be able to operate the machine, and generate a quality product. And if the machine breaks down, you need to know who to call so the machine can be fixed. In software world, you're not producing more of the same. What you're producing is emergent solutions based on new requirements. In this domain, you not only need experience, but you also need exposure to different kinds of problems, as opposed to solving the same problem over and over again. The economic model here is solution economics, not unit economics. How am I doing on time? I think I'm moving fairly quick. Good. In project management world, you're probably taught something called regression to mean. Does anyone know what regression to mean means? The assumption being everything is a normal distribution. Whereas in the real world, there is regression to the tail. And I'll explain what the tail means. There are two different distributions over here. From a statistical standpoint, the properties of both distributions are exactly the same. The number of observations is 1,000, the mean is 0, and the standard deviation is 1. But notice in a fat tail, which means the tail is longer or the body tends to rise, in the fat tail, the outlier can be 6, 7, 8, 100 times off. Whereas in a normal distribution, the chances that it will be 100 times off is very, very rare. A parallel example would be the height of human beings. Yeah? The height of human beings is normally distributed. The wealth of human beings is not. We could all combine all our wealth, and if Musk walks in, he would be an outlier at a scale that we can't even think of. You see? So what is happening in software is when we build our software, our survival depends not on surviving the average, but surviving the tail. If you don't survive the extreme events in software, then it can take the whole company down with it. Healthcare.gov is a good example of something like that occurring. The empirical evidence on IT projects is overwhelmingly in support of the fact that cost overruns are extremely high, or cost overruns are fat-tailed. On average, your IT project will be 447% off the expected cost, and it can be as much as 3,000 to 2,000% off the cost. Only governments can sustain that kind of a cost overrun. Most companies will never make it to the Harvard Business Review telling we failed the project spectacularly. In other words, you will never hear about companies that failed at their IT projects because the IT project sucked every single budget and resource and the company went down with it. You see, this is true for not just IT projects, but the same researcher looking across all projects, across all continents, across all domains, gives a project a success rate of 0.5% of meeting cost, of meeting benefit, and of meeting the timeliness or whatever. So here's my pitch for project work. We guarantee you will fail. All right? So that's the assumption of regression to mean leads us to. And this is a fallacy because in fat-tail domains, a lot of observations are okay. But then there is that one observation that takes away everything that you have accumulated up until now. And that's the problem with fat tail domains. Normal distribution does not assume that you will go off the mark at such a high margin, which is one of the main reasons why creating tiny projects is extremely important. In other words, if you create a project that is 1 month in duration, the worst that could happen is it would take you 6 months. But if you create a project plan for 1 year, the worst that could happen is 6 years, conditional on the survival of your company. If your company survives it, then 6 years maybe, but most likely it won't. Now, I tried to simulate this for an IT executive. What I tried to do was, rather than trying to figure out all the different portfolio strategies, because there are tons of it in the universe, said let's look at what happens when you make a project 1 through 5, that's the size of the project, and I roll a dice. If I roll a dice and if 6 comes, then the cost of that project is now 6 times the cost, which is the 447%, or 5 times the cost. So if I start with $100 in my budget, and I have bets that range from 1 through 5, and I run it for 1 million IT executives, right, as a simulation. What I get is majority of the IT executives will last about 30, 35 rounds until the budget runs out. Whereas if I make the bet 5 to 10, then I cut down the survival by half. In other words, the longer the project I make, it does not matter what strategy you use to execute on that project, because the most dominating factor is the size of the project. If you cut down the size of the project, you increase your chances of survival by a factor of 2. Are you guys following? Yeah? You can do a lot of internal VisGIF, all those fancy stuff. But if you don't cut down the size of the project, none of that matters, because that's the most dominant strategy that will survive the IT portfolio. Is smaller the size of the project, the more you will survive with your budget, because the budget can go off by a significant margin. So here's where I want to come and converge to before we start comparing different frameworks. Is what is the essence of scaling Agile? The essence of scaling Agile is to flip coordination problems into collaboration problems. Because when you have a coordination problem, and you'll see this across the whole company, there are instances where you need to coordinate when 2 people are performing 2 tasks. Person A doing task A, person B doing task B. In order for person A to do that task, they have to set up for the task, do the task, clean up, and then someone has to say they are ready to hand over your work to the next person, and so on. What ends up happening when I have a coordinator is now I need a plan for the coordinator, and I have to pay for the coordinator, and I have to pay for the coordinator to ask people, are you done yet, and so on and so forth. But I can eliminate all of that by putting A and B together in the same room and ask them to converge on the product increment, not converge on a plan of how they are going to do it, but actually converge on an increment of the product, so they can figure out how best to perform their respective tasks to squish the time frame of the work that is going to happen. A tip. And I'm not trying to say this is easy, you can do it tomorrow. What I'm trying to say is here's how we need to think about what it means to scale Agile. First and simplest thing, I think the easiest thing of all of this that is probably feasible, is to look at every instance of a red, green, yellow meeting that is occurring in your organization. Most often than not, this red, green, yellow status meeting is occurring at the intersection of a matrixed org. And this particular status meeting, like most things here's what is happening metaphorically. Assume your projects are cars, and they are all going up to the intersection. My question to you, is the project or the car red, green, or yellow, or the intersection red, green, or yellow? It is the damn intersection that is red, green, or yellow, not the project. Why are we asking the cars whether it is red, green, or yellow? I need to move the intersection more quickly, not force the drivers to accelerate at a steady state. Like, it's not going to help anyway. So what I need to do is I need to look at what is the intersection doing, not what the car is doing. And the way to do that is to build integrated Kanban boards. This is replacing one single giant program, red, green, yellow meeting that was happening every week. There were so many cars in flight, no one knew what was important. Everyone was driving wherever they wanted to drive, until we said, at this intersection, we are going to prioritize in a discovery board what is the most important thing. Let the product owner group figure out what they want from that particular epic, or whatever you want to call it, a big rock, before they ask each of these teams to work on the features and functions. The simple act of looking at the entire intersection, as opposed to looking at each project as a red, green, or yellow, now informs people to make local decisions that help with the whole of the intersection, not just their local projects. So wherever you find, I guess my tip is, wherever you have a red, green, yellow meeting, try to replace it with a big visualization of a Kanban system. That's the simplest tip. The second is to look at a goal-oriented scaling framework called Nexus. Nexus, you'll find more about it on scrum.org. As a descriptive model, what I'm focusing on is where are they converging and how often. What Nexus says is let's converge on a single product increment, irrespective of the number of teams that you have at the end of every single sprint. Now, how you get to that point, as far as Nexus is concerned, you will need something called as an integration team. Not to overload this, this could be a separate physical team, or it could be representatives from each of these Scrum teams, helping all of the teams to integrate the work that they are doing while they're building that increment. In other words, there is a designated group of experts whose primary function is to make sure that when I have multiple teams pulling respective features for that sprint, let's say 1 month duration, whatever they pull as their goal can be integrated and put into the product with quality by the end of the sprint. If we pull in some work that cannot be integrated into the product, then we don't do that, because that hurts the integrity of the product, and it is better to focus on product integrity than on generating work that cannot be put into the product. So here in Nexus, you'll see single iteration goal, single product backlog, single product owner, single product increment, multiple teams coming together to build that. And they do their retrospectives together to look at impediments that come in the process of building the product. Large-scale Scrum, which is another goal-oriented framework, has the same structure. Single product backlog, single iteration goal, single product increment. The only difference between Nexus and LESS is they try to solve dependency problems as an emergent solution system. In other words, rather than designating a group of people as the integration team, they expect the 4 teams to figure out how they're going to resolve dependencies as they plan for that sprint, and then they work towards building that increment. The addition of an overall retrospective gives avenue for senior executives or people outside the Scrum ecosystem to participate in improving the overall context within which we are building that product increment. So here's my summary. Nexus, which started from the Scrum framework, the metaphor that Scrum used early on, and Ken Schwaber, who is one of the co-creators of Scrum, used the metaphor of a sheepdog, the Scrum Master as a sheepdog who is protecting, the people who are doing the work. And you'll see the same metaphor play out in Nexus, where the sheepdog is now the integration Scrum team, which is protecting the team from itself and protecting the team from external forces who want to shove requirements in, because the sheepdog says, no, we can't integrate all of that into the product, so I'm going to protect it. The next metaphor is that of a large-scale Scrum, and the snow leopard is my favorite animal, because I think it survives in a very difficult terrain. In my experience working with organizations, when they get into trouble, they end up doing less, eventually. if they have to survive. They will all plan together, they will all refine together, they will make sure that dependencies are managed as they show up. But what Les is saying, don't wait until you get into trouble, start doing it from the first day so you will not have a problem. Here's an AI-generated image of turtles on top of turtles on top of turtles, which is Scrum at scale. I found it, by definition, incoherent. Like the Scrum guide says something and the Scrum at scale, it says something else. My only interpretation of Scrum at scale is it appeals to organizations that have an escalation-driven meeting culture. So if you have a group of managers who meet with other managers to resolve issues and highlight those issues to their respective subordinates, they will favor a Scrum of Scrums meeting because that gives them the same structure but with new labels. In other words, instead of managers, now I have Scrum Masters going to the Scrum of Scrums. The Scrum of Scrums will send someone to Scrum of Scrums, who will then send it to Scrum of Scrums, until you get to Meta Scrum, and it's turtles all the way down. And then there are elephants, and it's floating in endless space. The last one, chicken, bear, fish framework. This particular framework has the hygiene of a fish, the risk profile of hanging out with a bear, and the flight of a chicken. It's just basically all buzzwords combined into some hodgepodge that results in yet another Gantt chart. You see, no matter how you arrive at the Gantt chart, PI planning is the anchor event. What do we do in PI planning? What you do is you all come together, collaborate, and create a Gantt chart. That's what you do. You have multiple sprints. If you pay attention, and you must have taken some pictures, ideally pictures of clueless workers doing fist of five, committing to the plan, so the execs can say, my job is done. I've handed off the problem to the workers. If they can't deliver, it's their problem. Send me a report. You see, you're creating a Gantt chart, but you're creating a Gantt chart collaboratively. That does not make it Agile, because you're converging on the plan. What Agile says is converge on the product, not on the plan, because the plan's plan. You know, here's the difference between faking it and making it. If you're faking it, you're going to join the Agile wave. Most likely the conversation will be around, is AI the next wave? Because I need to catch on to the next wave, you know, because this wave's already done. Let's train everybody on Agile, sounding names and roles and titles so we can keep the structure exactly the same. And then the product quality remains the same, the customer satisfaction remains the same or worsens, and the employee engagement remains the same or gets worse. In making it, the reason you're doing Agile is because you want to improve something in the eyes of the customer, which is customer satisfaction, employee engagement, or quality. How you do it, you learn to build stable increments at regular takt, at regular cadence, every month, every 2 weeks, every day. And at that point, what will have changed would be the mindset, the organizational structure, the culture of the organization. What will not change is the mission of that company. It will still continue to serve in that same. If you're a financial company, you'll be a successful financial company. If you're a fashion company, you'll be a successful fashion company. Your mission will remain the same, you see, because you'll survive. That's the hidden punchline in here. I know I've kind of gone through a lot of ground here, and I'm trying to start an experiment, because I know this is not a trivial problem to solve, especially at this point in time when we feel like Agile's dead and all the other stuff. I'd like to reopen the conversation from scratch. So a friend of mine, he said, could you ask people at the Keep Agile Austin conference if they would like to get together for deep conversations at a resort in Fredericksburg? We'll figure out how it is at the least possible cost so we can have meaningful dialogue on this subject. If you are interested, sign up for the newsletter. There's an optional question. Indicate your interest so we can see if this is feasible to do, and then we'll take it from there. And that's pretty much it. Now I'm ready for questions. How much time do I have? Or I don't have? 10 minutes? 9 minutes. Okay, cool. Water. It's not yet polished. You know, the third, fourth iteration will be better because then I'll have eliminated a bunch of slides and delivery will be smooth.
Can you elaborate or go back on the intersection and the car? It made sense in the metaphor, but when you talked about the actual situation in an organization, I didn't quite understand what you were putting on the Kanban and how it compared with this large project update.
Right. So what likely happens in organizations with large programs is you have multiple things coming together. So for example, and I'll use a very basic waterfall example, but that's not necessarily always the case. You might have an analysis team, a design team, a testing team, and etc. And there's a project that is moving forward, and you would say, this is red because our testing phase is delayed. Yeah? That is reporting on the status of the car, saying the car is experiencing a red signal. Yeah, that's the intentional use of the metaphor. But what is really happening is it's the same intersection, the same company. It's the people that are working on these projects. They're also distributed across multiple projects. So I need to pay attention to the intersection, not to the car. You see? And what that means is I need to look at the entire soup to nuts of how do all projects, and this is mainly for projects organizations, where do these projects come from? How do we move it through the phase gates? And then what happens to it? Because it's the same group of people who are estimating the project for future and working on the project for now, while also fixing bugs from the business to keep the lights running. So it's not the project that is red. It is the, it is the stress on the people that are doing the work. So I need to look at the people and say, how is that work flowing for that intersection, as opposed to whether this tiny project or this giant project is red, green, or yellow. Did that help? Because in this picture, what you're looking at is there are some agile teams, some manager-led folks who are not directly working entirely on this effort, but they are critical for certain periods of time. Like some of these were mainframe teams. They had to make some job changes or data feeds available to then put onto the agile teams to use. But they would be working on something else completely because they were not even aware that these guys are stuck on the most important thing because they have no visibility into it. So when you bring the board up for that whole program, now these guys know that if they are stuck on anything on the top, we need to prioritize supporting them first over doing our keep the lights running or work out a way so we can make that local choice more effectively.
Next. Here I am. Sorry.
Sorry. I was like, where is it going? Yeah.
Yeah. So yes. I understand the emphasis on customer centricity and the mindset and culture change that needs to happen. Mm-hmm. And I'm totally with you on that. But, considering, the scale of the enterprise, decentralizing decision making, establishing roles, putting people in specific roles, becomes very important, and people need to solve problems within their own context. So, sometimes, yes, if you don't know, how that company is operating, yes. If you just look at it from the perspective of, these people have the same kind of roles that every company has, right. Then you might think that, they're doing fake agile, but there could also be companies where, yes, the mindset and culture exists, but still they might have to establish the kind of roles, that you actually mentioned in your presentation. Because it's so important to solve problems, within the context. So decentralizing decision-making is so important. So just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Right, right. So let me kind of break the layers down a bit. It's not here on the slide deck, but what you're going to encounter when you join a company, what they will show you first is an org chart. Yeah, I mean, you all probably look at the org chart. The use of the org chart is to say, here's the reporting relationship, this is the job function, we have a vacancy, go find someone to fill in that position in the org chart. Underlying that org chart is a sketch or an operating model of how are we going to build our products. So when I'm saying transition to Agile, what I'm saying is you need to redraw how the organization is going to build the product. And if you choose the project frame, you will not redraw it because it will be the exact same frame that has continued over the last 100 years. So if you now draw the product frame, how I build my product is different than how I execute a project. So once I redraw how we're going to build the product, that will then result in a new set of roles, a new set of responsibilities. The organizational challenge is people get hired for a certain role. So my identity is now built around fulfilling that role or function. Now, if I go to these folks and say, change it, what they will hear is what happens to my position, what happens to my salary, what happens to my status, what happens to et cetera, et cetera. One of the key tenets of this transformational change, not superficial change, is to make sure people have job safety, not role safety. In other words, you have to guarantee to the existing people in the organization that in the future organization, everyone will have a job. What your role will be and the description of what you're expected to do will be completely different than what it is. And that's a very hard step to take, which requires executive accountability and involvement. If I want to phone in a transformation, I would not bother with the sketch. I'll get everybody trained, and I'll give you new labels. Because at that point, executive accountability is not on the transformation, it's mainly on something else. Exactly. One of the best transformational stories, which is never called out as an agile transformation, is the transformation that happened at Microsoft. And it's like very huge, many angles to it. I'll pull one thread. What happened at Microsoft was product quality was a big issue for them. I mean, of course, you all know Microsoft. Do you remember the joke TV series when, or the advertisement when John Hodgman showed up as the Microsoft guy, and there was this other cool dude who was like Apple guy, 2007, 2008. This is Steve Ballmer era. And then Steve Ballmer wrote this whole thing about one Microsoft. Because earlier people had to buy individual products, like you have to buy Access separately, Excel separately, and then they said one Microsoft. From the customer standpoint, it was a move to cloud, but from the inside out, it was you're no longer a component team, you are a one Microsoft team. There's also this whole narrative around the growth mindset, which was a cultural transformation required for people to step away from being a know-it-all, which is I know everything about this role, to becoming a learn-it-all, which is I have the capability to grow and learn about other roles and functions. So you'll see some of these well-executed transformations, because Microsoft was not so well. Today, it's much, much better than what it was before. Yeah, that whole transformation was, in many respects, an agile transformation. But it was not just agile. There was a lot of other things that had to be pulled together for that to occur. And that's what I mean by executive accountability, is that it starts from the CEO and the board. Like if they are not signed up for it, it'll only cause a lot of change and churn and frustration on the ground level, but nothing really will change. My recommendation would be to remain a project organization, because faking it is more frustrating than not. Yes, sir.
I had a light bulb moment when you were going through the intersection piece that the gentleman was speaking about. And just to check my understanding is by aligning the stages that take place, so you're talking about the actual intersection, not the car, the efficiencies from a product owner perspective, it just makes me think if you're in a large organization, you're not, hearing about these impediments over here or going to this sprint review right here, and just imagine the time waste that you are trying to be part of different meetings, different perspectives, and then trying to cross like, oh, you have an issue here, you have an issue here, and then realizing you just had the same conversation twice and bring them together by combining those intersections. And yes, some teams may have it be smooth, but they may wait as other teams have impediments. But the benefit of that is from the control perspective, that's aligned when those obstacles do come up and allow you to, reprioritize and adjust your backlog. Is it my understanding that correctly?
Yes, what you're describing, and a little bit of a joke, maybe the last comment. What do you do on a project when it is done? Post-mortem. This is what you do on dead things. So what Agile is saying is make the system alive, let it kick, let the impediments show up so people can go to the problem and solve it. If you are dealing with a dead plan, which is already dead, but the moment you signed off on it, you're only going to make it even worse. So all of that focus on impediment, drawing the right people, that's what the Kanban system does, that's what the Scrum does. But it creates small amount of pain for everybody. Yeah? Am I good on time? Or it is time, thank you. I'm still here, I like beer, so we can talk.